Let's introduce our speakers. So first off, we're really honored to have our CEO and founder of Plug and Play, Saeed Amidi. Plug and Play, as Babak mentioned, is the world's largest innovation platform, bringing together the best startups, corporations, and investors to accelerate and scale new technologies. Saeed is a serial entrepreneur and a seasoned executive with nearly 30 years of experience founding and growing successful companies across over 4 continents. He's also one of Silicon Valley's most successful venture capitalists, indeed investing in over 250 startups a year, with notable exits including PayPal, Dropbox, Lending Club, and most recently Honey, which was in turn acquired by PayPal for over $4 billion. Saeed is a global thought leader and champion of sustainable, open innovation with a passion for inspiring and helping entrepreneurs and corporations succeed. Saeed, thanks for being with us today.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
And our guest, Richard Teng, CEO of, he's the Chief Executive Officer of the Financial Services Regulatory Authority, an internationally recognized and award-winning financial center within Abu Dhabi Global Market, ADGM. Since joining in March 2015, Richard has spearheaded the establishment of the financial center, leading up to the successful launch of ADGM in October 2015. And as CEO, he's got oversight over the entire spectrum of financial services within ADGM, spanning banking, insurance, and capital market sectors with integrated prudential and conducting supervisory responsibilities. To support the growth of ADGM as an international finance center, Richard also leads ecosystem initiatives and the strategic development of financial services offerings. And today, ADGM is the fastest growing asset management hub and financial center in MENA, and it is recognized as one of the top regional REIT management hubs. Among its many firsts, ADGM introduced the first private REIT program, the first comprehensive regulatory framework to govern crypto exchanges and ICO issuances, as well as the first regulatory fintech sandbox in the region. To transform the capital formation landscape in MENA, ADGM has partnered with the Shanghai Stock Exchange to develop a Belt and Road exchange in ADGM. So with more than 2 decades of regulatory leadership and financial sector development experience, Richard is featured frequently in international forums, including this, sharing thought leadership in areas such as fintech regulations, Belt and Road developments, and more. Prior to taking up leadership of the FSRA in 2015, he was the Chief Regulatory Officer of the Singapore Exchange and previously held an appointment as the Director of Corporate Finance of the Monetary Authority of Singapore. Richard holds a Master's in Applied Finance from the University of Western Sydney, Australia, where I'm from, and graduated with first-class honours in accountancy from the Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. I'm really excited to have Richard here today with us. Thanks so much for joining, Richard.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I need to cut down on that introduction going forward.
Oh, look, I love reading it as much as everyone else loves listening to it. So all very good. Hey, look, thanks so much for joining. I'm going to hand it over to you, Saeed, to take it from here, and I'll be back for the Q&A. Thanks very much.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, Richard. It's great to see you across the world with this Zoom. And again, this is, I believe, a new way of life, a new way of business. May I ask you, Richard, can you tell us the early days of, ADGM going back to 2015 and 16, before we started working together? I can't believe it, in October 2017. Can you tell us the vision and the early days of building this financial platform?
Absolutely. Sai, I hope that I will see you in person the next time around we meet. But just let me go back to the early days, right? I do think that when we first wanted to embark on a journey to start a financial services center, to support Abu Dhabi, to support the region in its growth, we harnessed the advantages of Abu Dhabi, right? So Abu Dhabi is a great place to live. It has the good macroeconomic stability, double A rated country, second largest sovereign wealth funds in the world, right? high livability index. But having said that, we did start off from a position of disadvantage. Disadvantage of not having critical mass, not having brand recognition, global recognition, not having all the regulatory MOUs that we need to get the center going. Financial institutions, and actually some of the financial journalists wrote us off very early days, right? To say that this region doesn't need another financial center. In fact, we could see consolidations of financial centers in this region. So we start from a position of disadvantage, but we tried to turn all those quite quickly into advantages. We didn't have critical mass, but we don't have legacy issues. So we can start off thinking blue skies, blue ocean. What is needed for the future? How do we embark on a journey to build a proper financial center supporting the growth in this region? And this region is very fast, robust growth, right? So if you look at the last 2 decades, most of the growth come from the emerging markets. 2/3 of growth come from emerging markets. 1/3 China, 1/3 the rest of the emerging markets. And this region, Middle East, Africa, including South Asia, will propel the growth of global economy in the next few decades. So how do we tap into that growth? How do we support that growth? How do we make ourselves relevant, becoming the most innovative, most progressive regulators in this environment? How do we learn from the shortcomings of other centers in this region? So there are many centers before us. You have Dubai, you have Qatar, you have Bahrain, you have Riyadh, and so on. Right? But the ecosystem is not yet fully developed. Right? This is a region that you come and raise funds, is good for raising funds, is good to raise assets, but it's not developed into a premium listing destination, asset management destination. There's 3 of the largest commercial aviation in the world, but it has not quite developed into an aviation financing center. So there are gaps. So we, in each of the areas that we focus on how to do a complete ecosystem development. And that has been what we have been embarking on since then.
Wonderful. You know, like we work with different financial centers around the world, New York, Frankfurt, Paris, Tokyo, Singapore, your home country. But somehow when we discuss Abu Dhabi and we talk to our entrepreneurs from around the world, they are excited to come to Abu Dhabi. They are excited to work with banks from UAE and Saudi. And somehow they tell me, you know, if they have the right product and the right technology, the proof of concept and implementation happens faster. Do you think is that because similar to Singapore, Abu Dhabi can work as a nimble, fast financial services playground to implement technologies fast and then expand?
Absolutely. So you mentioned a few countries. If you look at big countries, the big financial, the center servicing the big countries, New York, Frankfurt, you mentioned Tokyo, they have domestic considerations, right? So in terms of rules and regulations, in terms of ecosystem building, you tend to gravitate towards what's needed in the local environment. Whereas for countries or jurisdictions with much smaller economies, Singapore, Hong Kong, Abu Dhabi, London, right? You need to be much more competitive. You need to be much more agile. You need to serve much more than what the jurisdiction or the country offer. You need to serve the region. You need to serve international participants. Hence, we are forced to move much faster, more agile, thinking out of the box, which is what we do in Abu Dhabi Global Market. Right? So we look at, I mentioned for FinTech, we look at entire ecosystem, from startup, where we work with the likes of New York University, to acceleration, where we are so happy to have you as a partner. I still remember first time we met, you probably have not heard what Abu Dhabi Global Market was, right?
That's right.
To adoption, to deployment. So in each of these phases, we look at what's needed, be it in terms of funding. So we have a very healthy tech startup ecosystem on that front. with the likes of Mubadala, with the likes of Garden Ventures, Abu Dhabi Investment Office, ADQ, all coming in to support the funding ecosystem that's needed. We have a very good Hubs Anyone, which is a partnership between that Mubadala led, working with Microsoft, working with Abu Dhabi Investment Office, SoftBank, and ourselves to do that well. And on our part, on the rules and regulation part, we strive to be innovative regulator. It's an oxymoron to put innovation and regulator together in the same sentence. But we try to do that by understanding what is the need of the marketplace to support them. So by now we have the widest offering of digital licenses in this region, from digital payment to digital banking to digital securities offering to digital exchanges. Right? So we have the widest offering as of now because we work very closely with industry, understanding future trends, supporting them in their growth.
You know, you mentioned this when you're building something new, you don't have legacy systems to worry about. So, you know, again, now we try to do everything digitally and virtually, but specifically ADGM was born as a digital exchange, as a digital financial platform. Can you tell me more about that? Am I correct on my assumption that, you know, from the beginning, technology was a big pillar of your offering and your future?
Absolutely. So there's an external dimension and internal dimension. So let me talk about internal dimension first, right? So we have 3 different authorities. I look after financial services. We have a registration authority that register both financial services firm as well as commercial firms coming through, right? Including the likes of SPVs. We have a digital court because we are operating on the premise of common law in our jurisdiction, which is quite different from civil law within the UAE. So in all 3 different authorities across the infrastructure is digital by default. So anybody can come through very easily. It's a digital format, the entire registration process, to even court system. Right? So if there's any dispute, people can opt to be governed by the ADGM law. And the hearing is a digital format, right? So judges from different parts of the world, even before Zoom and Skype become fashionable, we are hearing cases on the digital format. So that's an internal dimension. If you look externally, we envisage, you know, technology, fintech, innovation is going to play a huge part in the entire financial services ecosystem. And this region needs much more financial inclusion, right? So how do we bring about financial inclusion into this region? It's really embracing innovation, embracing fintech, right? So we have a game plan from very early on to embrace fintech, to embrace innovation. Of course, this COVID has compressed that timeline. What we think will come about in 3 to 5 years has been compressed into 2 months, right? From e-learning to remote working, to eKYC, to digital onboarding, etc. So you see a lot of compression taking place. And I think we are key beneficiary of it because we understood the longer term trend. We try to make sure that we are positioned to do that, but all this has been compressed because of the virus.
Yeah, you know, talking about the virus, I had a very interesting talk with Mayor Park of Seoul, Korea. And last week, I had a great fireside talk with Sylvester Turner, the mayor of Houston. And it is really incredible trying to manage a big city during this COVID-19, and specifically the health issue and the economical issue sort of playing challenges with each other. How, as a leader during this challenging time, you work with your member financial organization, and what has been the impact for you? As you said, because you started as a digital platform, maybe the acceleration has gone on, but what are the challenges?
So you're right. So there are a few dimensions at play. There's a political dimension, a social dimension, an economic dimension, and a scientific dimension, the health dimension at play. And the interaction would then determine how different jurisdiction, economy, city react to it, right? When do you shut down? When do you lock down? When do you open up? For us, it's about building trust all along, right? Because as a jurisdiction, as a regulator, as a leader, as a manager, it's building trust with your stakeholders. Your stakeholders must know that you're working together with them to solve a problem, to overcome a situation, and communication is extremely important, especially in a situation like this, right? So it's the trust that we and the credibility that we have built up through time and during this episode, working alongside them, understanding their challenges. Many of the small and medium enterprises, the startup fintech will face challenge, right? Especially in the short term. Be it cash flow, most of them are trying to preserve cash, they're trying to raise more funds. So we work with our partners, Mubadala, there's the landlord of the place of Abu Dhabi Global Market, and Mubadala has granted rental offsets. For those that's housed in Hub 71, Mubadala has come out to really support them financially, both in terms of waiving the rental, as well as supporting them in terms of housing allowance, right, for their staff. So there are a lot of all this incentive in place, trying to help the firms conserve cash, trying to pump greater liquidity into the environment, trying to support them through government policies in terms of procuring more from the smaller and medium enterprises, making sure that anybody, the corporates that wish to open a bank account, can get that done very soon, that wish to get a loan can get those done very soon, right? So it's the entire ecosystem of support to support all these, both fintech as well as small and medium enterprises, survive and overcome this tougher period.
Very good. You know, I traveled to Singapore for more than 20 years, and I love the way Singapore has become a major hub for if you want to work in Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and even China. Sometimes it's better to be in Singapore with your head office and some of the key personnel. Do you feel or do you see that developing for Abu Dhabi at ADGM for multinationals? And can you tell me a few examples of financial institutions who have put roots in Abu Dhabi?
So we have, indeed, I think part of the reason I'm recruited for this role, you see an Asian face in Abu Dhabi leading an agency such as this is not normal. But the fact is that Singapore has developed itself very well over the course of past 30 to 40 years as a financial center, starting off as a small domestic center, a regional center, and then an international center. And Abu Dhabi is going through that path as well. So Martin Gilbert from Aberdeen said it very well. He said that when he first set up his regional headquarters in ADGM to serve the region, he said that he absolutely reminded him of Singapore when he first set up in Singapore. And he set up in Singapore at a time that all the firms, all the asset management firms choose to go to Hong Kong, which is the preeminent center at that point in time in Asia Pacific, right? So you have Tokyo, then you have Hong Kong, and Singapore was a small center in the 90s. But he chose to set it up because he saw the potential of what Singapore can offer. And we have demonstrated the potential of what ADGM can offer. So the likes of Citibank has put their office here, HSBC, State Street, BNP Paribas, Siemens have put their regional treasury center in ADGM as well. We have some of the Chinese enterprises, China Everbright Bank, China Nuclear putting their regional office in ADGM. So we have many of these instances, right? It's easy on hindsight after 4.5 years now, having won 4 Financial Center of the Year award for MENA region, to say that, look, we have done very well. But going back to the journey at the start, we didn't know. We are trying to make sure that we are properly differentiated. We are supporting the needs of this region that no other people are supporting in the way that we're supporting. And I think stakeholders have appreciated that.
Wonderful. I know that travel has become difficult. Etihad Airline is one of our partners in the region, and we work with the hotel industry, the hospitals, Cleveland Clinic in Abu Dhabi. If you look at your crystal ball, in US, I think we've been impacted the most than any other country for, unfortunately, unemployment, and I would say reduction of GDP. How do you feel UAE economy will go through this, and then more the greater Middle East will go through this challenge? And what effect does that have with the financial services?
A great question. So if you look at some of the engine of growth in the past, for Middle East, especially petrochemicals, right? Hospitality, tourism, some of them will continue to be very relevant going forward, some less important, right? So Abu Dhabi government, I do think, has embarked on a very aggressive program to diversify away from petrochemicals for a number of years now. But as of last year, there's a renewed emphasis, even before this entire situation evolved, there's a renewed emphasis to make sure that the economy is future-proof, it is tech-enabled, it is digital-enabled, it's ready for the future. We are embracing a smart nation to really serve not only ourselves, the region, but international. So there have been very aggressive Garden 21 program to really fund more than 50 initiatives on the different tracks to really support all these new areas of growth on the technology front, on the healthcare front, on financial services front. The very fact that we are in financial services and we are digital by default really is the foresight of the Abu Dhabi leaders to really push the agenda. And we continue to support the different funding needs, the asset management, the financing needs, the investment needs, as well as the needs of the community in terms of fintech ecosystem and rules and regulations that provide safety and soundness, but at the same time support growth. I think that's important going forward. And transforming the economy into a digital economy is what we are here to support Abu Dhabi.
Wonderful. You mentioned that this digital transformation was shrink to much shorter time. In healthcare, we had telemedicine almost ready to go. And because of this COVID-19, meeting your doctors went from less than 5% through digitally to up to some cases 70%. Quite frankly, comparing that to the financial world, I don't remember the last time I visited a bank. We try to do our banking, loan processing, real estate transaction, everything digitally. Do you see the way of global work changing forever? And when this change happens and there is no boundaries, do you see Abu Dhabi being able to serve a much bigger audience, like people in US, people in Europe, and not only Middle East?
I do think that your observation is absolutely correct. This virus forced a change in behavior. The lockdown situation forced people to do everything online, right? So digital entertainment, digital leisure, e-learning, it has been compressed. Telehealth, for example, is going to be very important. And some of these trends, some of this behavioral change will not go back. Many will, but some will not, right? Because people are used to it. Grocery shopping pre-COVID was only 12% in terms of e-grocery shopping. People like to go to supermarket to look at their products, to touch the products, etc. But because of the lockdown situation, people are so much more used to it. Post-COVID is likely to stand above 30%. Some will still go back, but it's going to be a much, much higher figure because people have been set up that way. They understand the convenience, right? So I think the list goes on. So we are going to see a huge trend on that front. Remote working, which is not so usual in this part of the world, will become a norm because people are used to the benefits of remote working. They think that it's still productive. You have Twitter of the world that says that employees can do remote working for a prolonged period of time. Right? So those will have profound impacts on even how cities are set up, are structured. Right? People don't need to stay in city center anymore. They can stay far away, near the beaches and near the golf course, depending on their hobbies and their likes. Same for financial services. I do think that you can, from Abu Dhabi, and our aspiration, our ambition is really to serve the region well. I mentioned Middle East, Africa, South Asia. It's a dynamic region. I don't think that we can definitely serve a much broader audience, reaching the West, reaching the East. But if you look at the example of Singapore serves Asia Pacific extremely well. Right? Can Singapore serve this region so well? Not really because of the time difference, the cultural difference. You need the knowledge on the ground, right? And vice versa. Can London serve this region as well as us? I do think that Abu Dhabi will serve this entire region that I mentioned much better than what London and Singapore can do. They have their natural catchment, but there is also things such as time zone differences, relationship that continues to be extremely important. People-to-people connection, right? That's extremely important. How do you do business locally? That's extremely important.
I think you mentioned a few times the trust is very important, the relationship is very important, and especially with these challenges, COVID-19, we feel somehow I hope it united the world, and we realize there is really no boundaries for this virus, and we need to work together to overcome it. But if I can ask, personally, I've been home since March 10th. And I don't know why. I guess it's a good news that my wife says I'm happier because you're not traveling. And we have spent a great time with my daughter, who is attending Santa Clara University from the family room now for a few months. How has life changed for you personally? What are the challenges you're facing personally?
Well, I used to travel much more often, Saeed. You mentioned March the 10th. I actually just touched down in Abu Dhabi on March the 9th from New York. I was having meetings in New York and I flew back on March the 9th. So I used to travel much more often. I used to hit back to Singapore once a month, and that is not possible now until the situation gets greater clarity. You mentioned that you will bring the world together in some sense, but a virus such as this nature will result in greater xenophobia tendencies. We are already in a multipolar world, right? The bifurcation is quite wide, and the blame game has just started. Who caused the virus? How is it transmitted? Unfortunately, I do think that the world is going to be much more polarized going forward. A lot of countries are going to bring back their own supply chain, critical supply chain, closer to home and back home in terms of food security, IT security, health supplies, energy, defense, critical manufacturing. So unfortunately, I do think that the world is going to be multipolar going forward. So it's important that we have all these people-to-people connection to really try to bring sense and sensibility, especially within the commercial world, to try to unite for common causes. There are many slow-burn issues, right? As we tackle this COVID, which is a near-term issue, we tackle the environment situation, which is quite a near-term issue. There are slow-burn issues that will catch fire longer term. Your climate change, for one, sustainability, right? Nobody is paying enough attention to some of this issue. And that needs global leadership, global cooperation to bring it about.
You know, in fact, the year 2020 for me was supposed to be the year of sustainability. You know, we launched a program with Alliance to End Plastic Waste with the top 30 corporations around the world. And we've been working to have cleaner water around the world, reduce the carbon footprint. But I hope this temporary focus on COVID-19 will pass and the sustainability issue becomes more relevant. And also I am happy to announce British Telecom just joined us to work both on sustainability as well as connectivity and communication to the world. So perhaps there is if there was a positive notion that may come out of that, I love to hear your viewpoint on the positive side. And then I will turn it to Simon for question from the audience. But I always like to leave on a positive note. So I want to know what positive outcome you can see, because in plug and play, we actually have seen a lot more urgency in digital transformation, in innovation. And we feel it's necessary to go on. But what is your point of view?
Well, firstly, let me congratulate and applaud you for the sustainability effort, right? That is extremely important. We are putting in place, many parts of the world are putting in place infrastructure that will have long-term implications, especially in our generation, that is anti-climate, for instance. So we need greater effort on that front. In terms of positive, I do think that this year, as you mentioned, highlighted the need to pay greater attention to our health, to our environment, and not to destroy them, right? The virus is speculated to come from animals, right? Because their habitat are threatened and so on. So I do think that there's renewed focus. There should be renewed focus going forward on that. It places emphasis on your loved ones, right? Especially the vulnerables. I'm extremely concerned about my parents who are in their 70s now, right? So they belong to the vulnerable group, right? Paying greater attention to them. But it is also bring forward some of the trends that we thought will come about in 3 to 5 years, compressing them together. And those are trends for the future. And we do need to pay attention to the younger ones to make sure that the people coming out from universities, the people are getting their schoolings now, are getting equipped with the necessary skill for the future economy, right? So I think those are some positive that we force ourselves to think going forward. How do we make a better society for them as well?
You're absolutely right. And even though I cannot go and hug my mother, but I see her 3 times a week, and we sit 2 meters apart, and somehow that even brings us closer together. So really, Richard, it's great having you. Maybe Simon can join us to see if there is any question for you or for me from the audience.
Fantastic, and great dialogue. Thanks so much, Richard and Saeed. We've got a number of great questions, and I feel like part of them exist in a COVID world and others a pre-COVID world or a post-COVID world, but perhaps we can start with the latter. There are a bunch of questions around some of the specific competitive advantages of the global market with respect to supporting startups. And so maybe there's a story of a particular startup that you could share with us of like what are the unique aspects of the ecosystem that make it attractive for local and global startups as a place to plant their plant their seeds.
So if I can give you an example, which is quite relevant, Securency, which is a US firm that have now really made Abu Dhabi Global Market their headquarters for this region. They are in compliance token, right? So we work with them quite closely through our sandbox to understand what they are, what they need, what sort of regulations they need, and supporting them. Abu Dhabi Investment Office invested in them because they are excited. We are excited with what they do. We are now going to do cross-border testing, roping in other regulators. So we are roping in Australian regulators, the US regulators. So if you think about it, the definition of accredited investors differ from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But if you can code into a token, right, what the company wish to offer so that they are complying with different jurisdictions requirements, and the regulators can be assured that anything offered by this firm, handled by this firm, will be in compliance with my jurisdiction requirements on accredited investors. You can do multiple offering in multiple jurisdictions within a very short period of time. So we are doing testing on that front with different regulators. So these are the type of support that you can look forward to seeing. We work very closely with the firms to support them in their growth, not only on the regulatory front, also on the funding front.
Mm-hmm. And that's finding funding both internally and externally, I imagine, as well.
Absolutely.
And I noted that you said that was a US company, and so
Yes.
are there particular are there particular areas of the world that you look to pull in from, or is it internally as well? Like, what's the sort of the mix?
Well, it's a mix of good local companies, good regional companies, and international companies, where their products and services will really make sense for the region, right? Because I think that's where we play a critical part, helping the different firms navigate the local environment, navigate the regional environment, right? And that's where I think we have the most influence over. Right? So be it local firms, we have many different good local examples. I think some of which Plug and Pay has also accelerated and invested in as well. So we have many of those examples where we will really support them to become local regional champions going forward.
Fantastic. We got a good question here from Honey about the talent pool, and you mentioned digital first, and now everyone's working from home. I suppose the question is, what do you see as really attractive for attracting global talent into the local ecosystem, and going forward, does this represent an even greater opportunity for you guys?
Abu Dhabi, I mentioned, in terms of quality of life, is extremely high, right? So in terms of livability index, it's the safest place in this region. You have high quality healthcare, the likes of Cleveland Clinic. You have top schools here, New York University, INSEAD, Paris Sorbonne universities, and the likes. So those are great attraction. It's a zero tax environment. So that is a great attraction, probably other than for Americans where you're taxed on a worldwide basis, but for most of the other jurisdictions. So this is very welcoming of foreign talent. We have close to 200 different nationalities living, working, staying in Abu Dhabi itself. Close to 80% of the community are international community. So it is extremely welcoming of foreign talent. But we're also building the pipeline of talent for the future. We do have Abu Dhabi Global Market Academy that works with university training providers across the globe to really support the locals, the foreigners that work here, to upskill their expertise, to make sure they are relevant for the future economy.
That's great. And let's turn to some COVID-related questions. And Saeed, maybe you could comment on this as well. Some questions around, particularly for fintechs and regtechs. What do you see as perhaps the major casualties of in the current environment, and what are you seeing whether it's investors or ecosystem players such as yourselves doing to support the local ecosystem or the startup ecosystem during this time?
I believe this e-commerce and the payment system has become more important than ever. This last mile delivery, and again, the question of trust, because if you have everything delivered to you, as Richard mentioned, you have to trust the payment system, trust the e-commerce side, trust the platform. So I feel for fintechs that work in making the transaction smoother, making the sort of, they call it no-touch payment these days. There is the world of opportunities, and we work with a lot of companies. Like one that comes to my mind is PayActive, because during this financial crisis, people need to be able to have access to money faster, even if it is 10 days faster. So personally, I feel fintech transfer of money, it will be more important than ever before. But I'd love to hear Richard's point of view.
No, I absolutely agree with you on that. And I'll just add that anything that deals with in-country payment, right? Because of the fear that virus can be transmitted through physical cash, will do extremely well. There's a big growth area, right? But if you are doing possibly cross-border remittance type of payment, those will be impacted in the short term because, the lack of travel, the lack of hospitality cross-border. So I think it depends on which sector you're in. Anything that deals with volatility, RegTech, RiskTech, eKYC, enabler on loan automation, all those areas will do extremely well, in my view, because there's huge need. And this episode demonstrated that a lot of banks, no matter what they say they are the best digital bank, they are the best digital format, they fail because they can't do a lot of things in the short period of time using a digital format. They can't do onboarding on a digital format. They can't do loan automation very quickly, loan analysis very quickly. So they need a lot of help from fintech. And instead of developing their own solutions, which they tend to do, I do think that a lot of them are gravitating towards sourcing for those solutions externally.
That's really great. And Richard and Saeed, you both were speaking about sustainability earlier on in the conversation. And we had a really good question here from a startup that is working on sustainable banking. And maybe you could talk about, in terms of your investment thesis and the kinds of startups that you're looking at, how high does the sustainability concept play in your decision-making around which horses to back?
In general, the new generation, favor the brands that not only talk about sustainability, but they actually execute it. How much of their product comes from circular economy? How, like the new factory, Mercedes would love to reduce the carbon footprint and make it smart factory or smart city. So again, we were planning to do 20 to 30% of our investments going forward with a sustainable element to it. And even banking or financial service institutions, insurance companies, banks, I know that the people who they lend money to, they like the company to be more cautious about the environment. Again, it's not any longer nice to have. I think you have to have, you must have a sustainability roadmap. But I love to hear what Richard puts. I mean, it's not obvious. I mean, for Coke or Pepsi or Procter and Gamble, reducing plastic waste is very relevant. In banking, I think you need to go a little deeper, but I love to hear Richard's point of view.
No, I agree with you absolutely, Sai, on that front. Especially the younger consumers, right? Our children's generation, they place a lot of emphasis. They have much greater awareness than my generation, or when I was brought up in Singapore, on issues of sustainability. And sustainability not only from an environmental front, sustainability from a socio-economic front as well. The bifurcation that we are seeing in the society is getting wider and wider. Is that sustainable for the society going forward? Right? So they do place, there's much greater awareness that there are some of these structural issues, not only in how we spend, the use of our plastics, but some of the structural issues when it comes to sustainability of pension contribution, right? Are we loading all these problems to future generation? The sustainability of how society continue to evolve, both politically as well as socially. I do think there's going to be much greater emphasis on that front going forward.
You know, and if I may add, you're, Richard, absolutely right. You know, environmental sustainability or recycling is important, but the social impact of like the challenges that we are seeing in America because of the social divide, we feel that is not also sustainable. So we need to work on equality and, you know, giving opportunities to everyone. And I feel technology can play a big role in that.
Absolutely.
You know, Richard, one of the things that we didn't get to touch on much was the Belt and Road initiatives, and maybe you could talk a little bit briefly about collaborating globally and especially with what you're doing with China.
So we have our first overseas office based in Beijing because, again, it's looking forward, future trends, right? So fintech innovation is one of future trends. China, the importance and rising China is another future trend that we saw. And China is quite different animal from the rest of the developed world, right? So if you look at US, we can engage stakeholders like yourself directly. We can engage the banks, we can engage and develop ecosystem. Same for most of the places in the Western Hemisphere. But China, because it's a centrally controlled and centrally planned economy, most of the large enterprises are state-owned enterprises. So we think that it's much more important for us to have a physical presence there, to engage the state-owned enterprises directly, to have that conversation with them, to cooperate with them directly on that front. So going through the government channel and then to the entities level. And I think that has worked very, very well for us. We have the likes of China Everbright Bank, I mentioned, China Nuclear, Jiangsu Provincial Government setting up a Belt and Road financing platform here for the different Chinese companies in Jiangsu that is trying to venture into the Middle East, North Africa region. They need financing, they need investments, they need insurance product, they need banking. So they're building all those to really support the Belt and Road initiative on those fronts. So China, we did it quite differently because the requirements are slightly different from the rest of the world.
Yeah, and Saeed, you've got experience on that front as well with a lot of plug and plays.
Saeed is very experienced in China.
Yeah.
If I can echo what Richard mentioned, you know, like we work with Mercedes, the auto industry, Ford, GM. Majority of the new production has been going to China for the last 10 years. And majority of the companies have more than 10 factories in China. Even though maybe the settlement will be due, and we are helping Detroit to come back. We love to have more production in Detroit. But unlike digital economy, manufacturing cars doesn't move back in immediately. You have to plan it, you have to have production, you have to have the tier 1, tier 2 suppliers follow the big brands. And I hope we will manufacture more cars in US. But quite frankly, I think it cannot happen overnight. And China is like with electric car and sustainability, I feel they will leapfrog every country in electric car, mainly because they have to. I mean, you talk about Beijing, the air quality was not livable. So now they need to move to cleaner production, cleaner automotive, electric car, but even manufacturing has to change in China. What do you think, Richard? I know you traveled there quite a bit.
Well, China is a very interesting case study. Again, they started off when most of the Western economies are developed. So they are able to leapfrog a generation in terms of having no legacy issues as well. So in China, there's no check writing. They skip the entire generation of check writing within financial services, right? So if you go to China, as you can experience, you need your Alipay and WeChat Pay. Otherwise, you feel like a total foreigner using cash. Many places don't accept cash anymore, right? So absolutely, the local environment and the Chinese government has placed a lot of emphasis on green tech, on environmental issues because of so much manufacturing happening in the country. It needs to take place. Greening the environment is very important. You can't have the country leader living in a city that is one of the most polluted in the world, as you mentioned, right? So it's not sustainable. So they have done a lot of work, and I applaud them for their work on the sustainability front as well, because it's necessity. They're trying to preserve the environment, preserve the economy for the next generation as well.
Richard, I don't know if you ever heard or know, as I said, this COVID-19 little bit changed priorities in the world, but I had changed my name to Saeed Sustainability Amidi. And really, we are very proud of you know, with the auto industry, with brand and retail, with the food industry, to really try to think sustainable first. But had you heard that before? Saeed Sustainability Amidi?
No, I've not heard it before, but I really like that. I love it. I need to find something equivalent in my middle name.
That is great. It is wonderful, Richard, having you. And I must say, I work with a lot of organizations around the world, with BNP Paribas, MUFG, financial institution. It's been a great pleasure working with your team, your people, and it is exciting, the past, the present, and more importantly, the future. I really am confident we can make a great impact in Abu Dhabi to serve as a regional hub for all financial services. But I leave the closing remarks to you, Richard.
No, thank you so much for that. The pleasure is ours. I don't know whether I can speak for you, but the first time I met you, I was trying to convince you to come to Abu Dhabi and make Abu Dhabi your Middle East hub. And I can see that you're somewhat skeptical about it. But a few years later, I hope that we have repaid your faith in us. But we look forward to continue to working together with you. You have grown 3 verticals very nicely now. We hope that you have many more verticals coming up in future to support the region for the growth. The region needs much more investment, much more innovation, much more talent to drive the growth agenda going forward. So we look forward to continue working with you, with everyone out there, to support the growth agenda, and the best is yet to be.
Thank you so much, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well said. Thank you so much to you both. And thanks very much for everyone who's joined today. I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague, Babak, to talk about some future events and to land the plane. Thanks so much, Babak.